that Star Wars as we knew it, Star Wars as a property that George Lucas created, is no more. It just does not exist from that perspective. It only exists to be a social justice propaganda machine.
That are relatable, that make me laugh or cry, depending what it is. I like a compelling, thought-provoking story, that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, for these people, diversity, subverting expectations. And what's so interesting about this is that a lot of the time when these studios pander to activists, it blows up in their face, because these types of activists that they're trying to court are the types of people, I mean, they're Karens, right? They're never going to be satisfied, and they're always going to demand more from you, and it will never be enough. So why these studios even try to pander to them time after time, I still don't quite understand, but whatever, it's their prerogative, they can do what they want.
But as we've been getting more information about this game, it has been pretty clear that it's going to be bogged down by what almost everything that gets popular gets bogged down by: identity politics and SJW nonsense, because this is what they do. If something is popular, if something has a platform, they want to interject that into whatever it is that has the platform. We've seen this over and over again from movies, we've seen it in certain games, and now we're seeing it potentially within the Last of Us 2.
We like to talk about the reactionary right and anti-SJWs on this channel. Now, something that constantly comes up, no matter what we're talking about, is diversity. And to these guys, diversity equals woke politics. Now, I've been thinking about this topic for a while, and I was kind of thinking about, why do these guys say this? Why is diversity to them just woke politics? Do you have to be a far leftist to want more representation of different groups? And it does feel these days that you do have to be pretty left-leaning to want this stuff. But historically, I don't think you definitely have to be, although conservative ideology is normally about promoting the status quo. The status quo in countries like the United States and the UK is mainly focused on, I guess, this white power structure of white people, and it's in their best interest to keep it that way, and that's how conservative ideology props that stuff up. But today what we're going to go through is, I guess, the different strands of this ideology. You guys might remember I made a series called The Toxic Politics of the Gaming Community, where I went from like one extreme to the more centrist people, but spoke about how this anti-SJW language was sort of a through line through all of them, regardless of their political beliefs. We're going to do something similar today. So I want to look at the people who do seem to be just bigoted, and their reaction to this diversity stuff is coming from a place of bigotry. Then I'm going to talk about people who think it's like a distraction and it ruins the story. And then I'm going to talk about other people who might be more centrist and not as far right as the people I've spoke about before, but how they often say this similar stuff about, forced diversity, anti-SJWs, and all this other stuff. If you want to support my work continuing for the future, regardless of what YouTube do, please consider becoming a patron. If you want to join our growing community, please check out the Discord and the subreddit in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, check out @the_Kavernacle on Instagram and Twitter. And also u/TommyCahill1995 for my personal Reddit. Thanks so much for the support recently. We're chugging along to 35k. For every 5k we get a new chocolate orange. Help me build this pyramid. I'm going to be back to streaming this week after taking a break last week to go on holiday. If you want to watch my streams Tuesday and Thursday, they are also going to be archived, hopefully on my second channel, the Kavernacle Extra. Now, to piggyback off my video about a week and a half ago, I want to talk about Star Wars. And I feel like Star Wars is one of the most ridiculous places to cry about alleged forced diversity. But there's something recently which obviously kicked off a bit of a fuss with these guys. And it was the announcement that there were 2 Jedis who were twins who were transgender non-binary. So Star Wars on their Instagram put out a post saying, "In honor of Trans Day of Visibility, we're proud to unveil an exclusive cover highlighting Terek and Serat, trans non-binary Jedi, currently featured in Marvel's The High Republic comic. We support trans lives, and we are passionate and committed to broadening our representation in a galaxy far, far away." And of course, it's perfectly normal to represent trans people in like normal media. But if we're going to talk about like fantastical, massive galaxies where you have millions of different species of aliens who have all these, weird different cultures and have weird different biologies and everything. You're honestly telling me that two trans non-binary people is the most outrageous thing you've heard about in this really diverse galaxy? So let's first take a look at Geeks and Gamers' reaction to this.
It's just a fact that Star Wars as we knew it, Star Wars as a property that George Lucas created and catapulted to the biggest thing that we've ever seen in the history of pop culture, is no more. It just does not exist from that perspective. It only exists to be a social justice propaganda machine. And if you disagree with that, then you will be called a bigot, you will be called a racist, you'll be called a sexist. That is what Lucasfilm is doing. It does not represent Star Wars. And again, this is nothing to do with anybody that is a trans person or whatever. This is talking about how Lucasfilm uses identity politics. To attack their fan base. That's what this is about. Because Lucasfilm is not about Star Wars. Lucasfilm is about identity politics. They posted this on Facebook, so you have to use your personal account to call them out, and then get doxxed and harassed by radical activists for your bigotry. He's 100% right. 100% right. They did this on Facebook for a reason. But ultimately, Star Wars is not what you want it to be. It's not what I want it to be. It's not what anyone that grew up watching it wants it to be. It is simply a social justice propaganda platform now.
Now, to people like him, it's not just him. They see this as part of the culture war, where the SJWs are just pushing an ideology. Your ideology by just representing trans non-binary people. It's something that has been going on for a long, long time. But even on this issue, you do not have to be the most left-wing people to accept that gender isn't binary. And an example people might not know is in Pakistan, not a woke place, not a very liberal place, there is actually a third gender. So in Pakistan, they are called the Khawaja Sira, the equivalent of transgender in the Urdu language. Hijras are officially recognized as a third gender in the Indian subcontinent, being considered neither completely male nor female. So this type of stuff even goes back to Greek gods and other various ancient gods as well. It's not something new. We've been made to think it's something new. And I think there's something interesting for people to go and research. Look at the Weimar Republic and look at the LGBT community and the push for LGBT rights in that society. I didn't know anything about this until I was researching some of my videos earlier in the year. It's extremely interesting, and it makes you realize the only reason we think this stuff is like modern wokeism is because it's been suppressed for decades and decades and decades. Now, for me, this type of stuff is like a visceral gut reaction of someone who actually is bigoted, in that just this representation, this tiny representation of these two twin Jedis in the High Republic series of comics and novels is enough for you to kick up a fuss and scream about identity politics and scream about an SJW agenda. And I think how minor these characters are really reveal what these people are and how they actually view these people. Because it's not even a main character. It's not someone in the movies. Not that it'd be acceptable if they did this, but they're freaking out about just a minor character in the comics and novels. Again, it's totally ridiculous, but again, this is the part where I show you this is often a dog whistle for bigoted views. People who don't accept these guys, they see anything that deviates from the traditional white male power structure is somehow bad, is somehow woke, is somehow part of some massive left-wing agenda. Now, I'm going to come back to transgender issues when I talk about part 3 with, the views of people on things like Cyberpunk the game, but I'm going to move it across to another person who just goes mask off with outright bigotry when they see diversity. And I played these clips in my Last Jedi video from a couple weeks ago. Basically, it's no BS talking about why The Last Jedi is woke and bad. And what he does is say that every character who's not played by a white guy is a token minority, and then every white guy in the film is demonized, meaning this film has an agenda of anti-white politics.
Start with the overly diverse casting, something that's been painstakingly present in all 3 of the new Star Wars movies made under Disney. Things are so diverse and multicultural now, it's kind of distracting, if we're being honest. Luckily, the cast is good in The Last Jedi. They're all talented actors, but unfortunately, they're not given much to work with here, story-wise. They do their best, but sometimes your best isn't good enough. One caveat to throw in in there would, of course, be the demonization of white males, who in the new movies are almost exclusively all the villains and evil characters. And on the flip side, minorities and women are all the best and coolest characters. There's this old coot in this movie, which is fine, but I'm starting to think he's a bit of a scapegoat here. He represents what's left of good white males in the franchise, certainly, a demographic that in the real world has constantly been outcasted and shunned from our society, especially lately. Luke is a figure from the older generation, a generation that's slowly dying out and being taken over by over-diversity, PC culture, and SJWism. Next is Finn, the token black guy. Not much else to say about him but that, because he really doesn't bring much to the table in this movie, besides his boring and pointless casino subplot. Oh, he almost sacrifices himself in the end though, to save the resistance, but before he gets a chance to do anything significant, he's pushed out of the way and effectively cucked by his new girlfriend Rose, the token Asian in this movie, and probably its worst part. Rounding out the main cast, we got the token Latin man, pejoratively called Flyboy in this film.
The Star Wars-ness of this stuff makes these two really ridiculous in that you do, like I said, you do have this galaxy that is extremely diverse and isn't even just humans. But to you, the most outrageous thing is that some people who are humans aren't white in this insanely diverse galaxy. So if I'm speculating why these guys think diversity is politics, it is just, a visceral, bigoted reaction. It's just you see it, you hate it, because you have these hateful beliefs. Doesn't really go too much deeper in these guys' case, I guess, if you want to extend it a bit more. It's a grift where they create narratives about identity politics, about leftists taking over everything, about cultural Marxism, about all this different stuff. But at its core, you can tell these guys are getting pretty heated and angry about just the diversity on the surface level, and think the diversity in itself is pushing a political message when it's not. You can have diversity without a left-wing political agenda. And of course, I'm someone who's on the left wing. There are liberals who are very pro-diversity. I do not agree with liberals on much. So even if you say you have to be, I guess, centrist to want diversity, there is still a broad spectrum of people on, the left who like diversity and want more diverse stories because it's more interesting to represent more people and get stories you're not as familiar with. But our politics are very, very different in nearly every other aspect. Now, next you have the people who think this agenda is ruining the story just because they are trying to maybe shoehorn it in and make it really bad because they're trying to focus on these identity politics. It's sort of an extension of the first point, although some of these people try and apply logic rather than just having, a gut reaction. And you could see this with the backlash to The Last of Us Part 2. Now, I really like this game. I actually made a video about the anti-SJW reaction to this game. But basically, before it released, it was rumoured that Abby actually might be a transgender character. Abby is not a transgender character, but it was rumoured that they were going to be. But there is a transgender character in the game called Lev, and a lot of the story is about the relationship between Abby and Lev. It also has a little side part of his story, and part of his main arc is about him being transgender. You also have a gay couple in it, and massive spoilers, don't watch anymore, don't listen to what I'm going to say right now, but in the end, they also have a child together. Now, supposed mega fans of the first game said that the second game was getting caught up in left-wing politics, trying to push a political agenda, seemingly oblivious to the fact that there are 3 gay characters in the first Last of Us. This was back in 2013. Ellie, Riley, and Bill. And the Bill stuff is kind of hard to miss. I guess with the Ellie and Riley stuff, you've got to play the DLC. So let's just say you at least have one explicitly gay male character in the first Last of Us. Now in the second one, you have 2, and then you have a transgender character as well. Now here is Lauren Chen and Jeremy again talking about why this basically ruined The Last of Us.
I have a different standard for what I like to call good entertainment. I like things, that are relatable, that make me laugh or cry, depending what it is. I like a compelling, thought-provoking story, that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, for these people, diversity, subverting expectations. And what's so interesting about this is that a lot of the time when these studios pander to activists, it blows up in their face because these types of activists that they're trying to court are the types of people, I mean, they're Karens, right? They're never going to be satisfied and they're always going to demand more from you and it will never be enough. So why these studios even try to pander to them time after time, I still don't quite understand, but whatever, it's their prerogative, they can do what they want.
But as we've been getting more information about this game, it has been pretty clear that it's going to be bogged down by what almost everything that gets popular gets bogged down by: identity politics and SJW nonsense, because this is what they do. If something is popular, if something has a platform, they want to interject that into whatever it is that has the platform. We've seen this over and over again from movies, we've seen it in certain games, and now we're seeing it potentially within the Last of Us 2.
Now again, this is playing into part of the first point, but basically saying that the diversity and the focus on diversity is pandering. And they're somehow, because of the changing times, they're trying to pander to an audience that maybe won't even like this stuff in the first place. And it makes me laugh. Like, it feels like these guys don't understand how companies run. Since I've listened to tons of interviews about both games, the idea for Bill to be gay actually came from the actor who played Bill, not from Neil Druckmann and the writing team. And the same goes with Ellie. It actually came from Ashley Johnson herself, not from Neil Druckmann. So these are people who said it felt right that these characters were this way, and then the director and the writers of the game said, that sounds like a good idea. Now, they also talk about in Naughty Dog, they have, quite a high proportion of LGBT people, especially compared to many other workplaces. I think I read a study somewhere that the games industry does have quite a high proportion of LGBT people working in it compared to other industries. And they said, they spoke a lot about this character Lev, and the actor of Lev themselves is transgender as well. So they felt like it was an interesting story to tell. It's not the absolute focus of the game, but it's in there. But it makes me laugh. They somehow think like the trans community are going to love The Last of Us if we stick this in it, and let's screw over everyone else. Like, we're all hateful bigots and we can't stand that stuff, and the only people going to like it are trans people. I found like a very, very interesting story. Lev's actually one of my favourite characters in the game, and the story between Lev and, the struggle they went through is very, very interesting. But this is just another part of it. It's where this sort of diversity is ruining stuff. Now, for a lot of them, it used to just be about racial diversity, and that's kind of gone away a tiny bit. It's still there, but their focus more is on LGBT representation in these games, part of like their new grift and everything. But they say this with a lot of stuff. They say a lot of things are now getting ruined by turning woke. And it just makes me laugh because these people are so ignorant, because like with Star Wars, the first Star Wars was woke. How many times I told you in this channel that it was actually inspired by the Vietnam War, where the Empire are the Americans. The same with the original Last of Us. If you play the original Last of Us and understand that game, apparently Jeremy Forgets the Game is a massive fan of it, then it would not be surprising that it might have some more representation in it of groups that maybe don't get much representation in mainstream video games. This wasn't Duke Nukem suddenly deciding to tell like a transgender story or something. It's not surprising. It's not like someone has some sort of agenda. It's just the narrative team thought it might be interesting. But a lot of the people I've shown you so far, like, I'd consider outright bigots. These guys aren't accepting of this stuff in the first place. And they hide behind this political argument that diversity is a political choice. It's part of the woke agenda to ruin American values or ruin Western values. It's cultural Marxism. It's not surprising coming from these people, because if you look at their politics, it is conservative American, which I've said constantly on a normal political spectrum is far-right politics. If you spoke a lot like these people in, for example, European politics, you would be associated with the far right in Europe and the mainstream far right parties. But like with my little series, I want to drag this into people who I'd consider maybe centre right and possibly centre left. So two people I spoke about before is the Act Man and Angry Joe. Now the Act Man made a video about SJWs in like 2017. So who knows if he actually believes this stuff anymore. And I'm not saying he necessarily does, but what I want to use it as is a good example of how these people often rationalize these arguments about diversity being part of some radical political agenda. So on the Act-Man's video, he was talking about some backlash to The Witcher 3 that said it didn't have much representation, and then he was going into the arguments that because it's like a Polish story and everything like that. We do not need to force woke politics onto it. He also says, like many anti-SJWs, is that we're making race an issue, and race was never an issue before. And he also says about the argument that most gamers in America are white, so it makes sense to tell more white stories.
The real problem is seeing a lack of diversity as a problem. When you boil down the quality of any art or narrative down to a gender or percentage of skin tones, you are making the diversity quota an issue. Now, Witcher 3 came under fire and criticism because it features an all-white cast. But this article by Polygon seems to think otherwise. Reviews have lavished praise, perfect scores, and awards on it, while some reviews have mentioned issues such as sexism. None I read mentioned another crucial misstep. Not a single human in the game is a person of color. And it's tied to a central issue here that gaming as a whole needs to face. Concerns of minority groups are not only ignored, they're so often not even considered. America has a big history with race because we are a very diverse country. But as Morgan Freeman wisely said,
how are we going to get rid of racism?
Stop talking about it.
Stop making it an issue. Stop trying to put race into every discussion, into every piece of media and art. Stop trying to make race an issue. Is there a lack of diverse people from different cultures as video game protagonists and in the industry? Perhaps. But it's not really an issue. That's just the demographics of America. Now, if you want to change what video game companies appealed to, you'd need to change the demographics. And good luck with that.
So, of course, this stuff is quite ridiculous, but they're using a more, I guess, structured argument to try and make their point. But you wouldn't really make the same argument for movies. Like, I don't go to the cinema and say, I want every movie to be like John McClane doing stuff because I'm a white guy. And that's what white people want. You do not want to do that, because with movies and with a lot of media, it's often, especially for me, in what I choose to consume, it's about learning. It's about learning about other peoples, other cultures, other societies, people who are not like me. Because I live my own life, I get to see my experience every day. Sometimes I like, films about countries I'm from. I like Dunkirk, for example. It's an interesting perspective from, British people during the war, and that's fine. But then I was thinking in my head, I would like a film about the Gurkhas in World War II, because that's a really interesting group of people who are linked to the British Empire. But I've never really seen a film about them, and I'd like to see that. And there was a bit of a backlash to Dunkirk for not showing any minority soldiers from the Empire. And then 1917 did show it, and they showed some Sikh soldiers, Sikhs who fought in large numbers for Britain in World War I. Of course, got a massive backlash that it was trying to wokenize and push woke politics on a war movie. And it might have taken some liberties with historical accuracy because it had mixed units and stuff. But the point of the film was just to show you these guys actually did stuff in the war. And that is where representation for these guys, they might get mad about it. But for me, it's like you have one chance to show this stuff. You have this one movie. Why not just include it? It's not historically accurate anyway to a fault. So I find that sort of argument pretty ridiculous. And I don't think it necessarily comes from a place of real vitriolic bigotry, but it might show a lot about the society they grow up in. And, stop talking about race, they say. How are we ever going to get anything done if we stop talking about it? We live in societies that are extremely racist to various different groups. If I just stop talking about it, what do you think is going to happen? People are just going to hold on to their prejudices for much, much longer. It's going to be passed down from generation to generation to generation. And it does in many countries, like the United States, like Britain, places like India as well. These places have problems because we cannot have a proper conversation on these things because of people, like I've mentioned in the video. There is such pushback to this stuff. I get called a self-hating white man all the time because I talk about this stuff. And a self-hating Brit, despite, my family being completely from Ireland and stuff, so I know how bad Britain can be to different countries. But the only way we move forward is talk about this stuff and have an open dialogue, not just ignore it and be like, well, most gamers in the US are white dudes, so let's just make Duke Nukem forever. And also, the point in the world is that gamers generally now are really diverse. Probably the biggest games market is in Asia now, with Chinese, Japanese, and South Korean people. So you could even make the argument that white gamers are in the minority now. So SJWs have not made this stuff an issue. And even if I wanted to take his point about The Witcher more seriously, I could say something like, maybe that's a fair point with Poland. It doesn't have much representation. And maybe, you know, as the author said, it's meant to be about medieval Poland in this world. But again, The Witcher's a weird one because it's quite a diverse world in, you know, like Star Wars in terms of like different mythical races. And then the show where the author was involved is actually pretty diverse. But people like Ackman's point is that we're just ruining stuff. We're trying to put politics into everything. Put diversity into things that do not need it, do not want it, and the only reason it would be in it is to be, you know, a token signal to people like myself who are really woke and would be outraged if The Witcher didn't have any black people in it, for example. So then people like this like to see anything like this, any push for diversity, as something bad, as part of this woke agenda. Now, the Ackman, of course, isn't the worst person in this regard. But now I want to get to Angry Joe, who I guess could be considered centre-left, even though he has some like real chud takes, especially about like The Last of Us Part 2, saying it was like one of the worst games of last year because you play as Abby in it. I do not understand how, you know, a game critic would have some ridiculous take like that. But basically what happened, I made a video on this as well, the dystopian development and marketing of Cyberpunk 2077, is that CD Projekt Red as a company has been involved in numerous little controversies about transphobia. Now, before the game came out, there was like this dystopian advert with a trans person on it, and some trans people said, I don't like this, I don't trust CD Projekt Red to handle this with enough sensitivity given their history. Then Angry Joe started ranting about how SJWs were trying to ruin everything and were having a go at a company that was like a paragon of good gaming. That's funny how that turned out.
Targeting, you see how transparent their bullshit is and how they are either virtue signaling or completely ignorant or reaching for reasons. And then there's also the transphobic thing, where it's one of the pictures has a trans person and there's a big fucking dick. There's a big old huge dick, right? And the person, and I read the artist has a lot of artwork, and this artist loves the body. Doesn't matter if it's male, female, trans, but you do put that out there in some way, and then somebody thinks it's offensive on behalf of somebody else. From my perspective, social justice is not a negative thing. It wasn't a negative thing until it's being co-opted by vapid morons who, complain about every little goddamn letter in the word in order to take the that T is offensive.
Now, in the video I done on this, I read a good article from a trans gamer who talked about how bad the representation of trans people was actually in Cyberpunk. But again, I don't know why Angry Joe seems to think people may be having a problem with this proven really bad company who clearly, not very sensitive about trans issues, have tried to appeal to like edgier gamers. Maybe will not handle this stuff well, especially when they're showing this dystopian art where they're really sexualizing a trans person. People being concerned about that isn't just someone reaching and people just making stuff up to get mad about. It is just, someone sharing their concern with this stuff. And again, I don't think Angry Joe is anti-diversity. I don't think he is, a totally bad guy. I've had, my own argument with him about his stance on the National Guard, funnily enough. But what I wanted to do is show how there's like different levels to this stuff. So you have Angry Joe, who's probably more moderate, and he says stuff like that. And that's disappointing for someone like him if you follow him, or, followed his career, follow him on Twitter. And that's disappointing because he just thinks people are reaching for stuff. They're trying to be offended. Social justice isn't a bad thing, as he said, but these social justice warriors are bad because they just want to be mad about things. Whereas Axeman tries to say that we're trying to force it in where it doesn't need to be, and that diversity maybe is a positive thing, but because most Americans are white dudes who play video games, then it doesn't really make sense in many contexts. Now, there's two guys there who I don't think are totally bigoted, and I don't think they hate this stuff necessarily because they are overtly bigoted. Maybe they do hold some bigoted beliefs like most people do when you grow up in a racist country. But then you go on to the other people. You have geeks and gamers, and you have the outrage to the Star Wars stuff, and you have No BS and how he talks about token diversity in The Last Jedi, and then you have the backlash to The Last of Us Part 2, and you have these people basically saying that diversity is politics. Just merely having diversity is pushing a far-left, radical SJW agenda. And it's ruining your video games, and it's ruining your comic books. It's ruining all this stuff, because if you're a bigoted white dude from the West, apparently all you want to see is white dudes in these comics. And also it takes a bit of ignorance, because if you're a supposed fan of the first Last of Us, if you're a fan of the original Star Wars, somehow you have missed the left-wing messages in this stuff, which are way more radical in many ways than actual diversity and representation. So hopefully I've outlined the levels to this stuff, where I do think some of it is fueled 100% by bigotry, like the people at the start I outlined. But when I get to the people later on in the video, I feel like while bigotry could play a part, it's more like their political views, maybe their line centre-right, and they've been sort of indoctrinated in this stuff. And despite not being, as far right as some of the people I've shown, they do buy into this narrative about SJWs. They do buy into the successful campaign by people in the right in America and people in the right in the UK about woke people trying to, ruin everything in your life, trying to change history, trying to make everything about representation. And like you see with like the Last of Us stuff, and you see with other things, they think it's ruining the story, because instead of telling a good story, you were just trying to push your political agenda by showing people how woke you are, because that's the most important thing apparently to people, especially those who slave away in creative industries. You don't want to tell a good story. You just want to prove to everyone how woke you are. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to join our communities, join the Discord and the subreddit in the description. If you want to support my work, support my Patreon, also in the description. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.